Gauchos, art of Argentina. Over centuries, livestock escaped from 16th century Spanish settlements of South America's southern cone. They grew into millions of free-roaming cattle and criollo horses on the Argentine Pampa, the vast grasslands descending from the Andes down to the Patagonian Desert. By the 18th century, Creoles of Spanish, Native American, and African stock wandered there, catching and taming horses and capturing cattle. These nomads of the Pampa were called Gauchos, derived from a word of Quechua dialect, which means orphaned, solitary figure. With the lasso and boleadoras, bolas, a gaucho on foot could capture a horse and pull down a fierce bull. Witnessing the rush of the wild steed, the force of the storm, and the rumble of stampeding cattle, the gaucho was a front-row spectator to the wonders of nature. Making his home under the star-studded sky each night, he lived as free as a bird in the sky. On horseback, a gaucho twirls the noose of a braided rawhide lasso to rope a calf around the neck. Argentines wrote many songs, poems, and books which honor the gaucho. Poet Jorge Luis Borges called them peasants of the rough lands. Steady on the desert horse, they broke that very morning. The horse is essential to the gaucho, who learns to ride at a young age. Ezequiel Ramos Mejia said, "The gaucho and the horse are legendary twins. On foot, he is inconceivable. Amid dangerous and routine tasks, the gaucho relies on his horse, his unfailing ally, deliverer, and friend." Wise, self-reliant gauchos made their home in the open fields. Above all, legendary gauchos like author Ricardo Guiralda's character Don Segundo Sombra cherished their freedom. Historian Paul Grossack said that this type of gaucho had an unquenchable thirst for adventure and nostalgia for the desert. He sometimes hired himself out, but not for long, on some estancia, ranch, where he tamed horses, drove, branded, and slaughtered cattle, or sheared and corralled sheep. The gaucho suffered drenching rains, brutal sun, and cutting cold. He accepted whatever came along without grumbling. Some gauchos left the wanderer's life on the Pampa for a small plot of land where they could start a family, manage a herd of cattle or sheep, and grow a few crops. Like the nomadic gauchos, they were superb horsemen, skilled at using the lasso and boleadoras and at doing livestock-related tasks. The nomadic gaucho was poor but independent because he didn't need much beyond his criollo horse, saddle, poncho, and a fason, short sword. He wore a shirt, a vest or short jacket, cotton drawers, and a chirapa, rectangular piece of clothing of Indian origin, wrapped around his waist and legs. He secured the chirapa with a woolen sash and a tirador, stiff, wide leather belt with 2 or 3 pockets. Later on, bombachas, pleated pants with buttoned ankles that fit inside boots, replaced the chirapa. Most also wore a chambergo, wide-brim hat, or a wool bonias, a beret inherited from French and Spanish ancestors. The gaucho often wore botas de potro, boots made from single pieces of hide slipped from the legs of a colt. After yanking a hide inside out, he pulled it up his leg to his knee, where it dried tightly in place. Often he left the toe open. A gaucho hung rawhide straps from each side of his saddle. Near the bottom he tied a knot, creating a loop that he grasped with his big toe. Later, a metal stirrup with a flat base to support the rider's foot replaced the rawhide loop. The gaucho tied spurs to his ankles. A gaucho of lesser means, like Don Segundo Sombra, wore espadrilles, fabric shoes with braided fiber soles. The tirador, front and back, fastens at the front with a rastra, silver or gold buckle with buttons and chains. Gauchos for hire often took silver coins, which they received as pay, to a silversmith who converted them into stirrups, spurs, knife handles or sheaths, knife covers, whip handles, bridles, horse harnesses, or embellishments for their tirador. Instead of a tirador, Don Segundo Zambra wore a thick pigskin belt with a piece of bone from which his rebenque, leather whip, hung. At the gaucho's back, between his woolen sash and tirador, he tucks a sheath façon. It is his most prized possession after his horse. He uses it throughout the day for butchering, castrating, skinning, eating, and self-defense. In the Gaucho Juan Morera, Eduardo Gutierrez wrote about a gaucho outlaw. Juan Morera faced rivals one-on-one in deadly duels with the façon. In a fight, Gutierrez writes, "The dim of the room flashed with the hot lightning of their eyes and the cold lightning of their steel." Morera became known as the greatest fighter in deadly knife duels, avenging wrongs which drove him to a life of crime. In the poem The Gaucho Martin Fierro by Jose Hernandez, Martin Fierro describes the gaucho. His hope is his courage, his defense is his caution, his horse is his salvation, and he spends sleepless night with no more protection than the sky and no other friend than his blade. The gaucho's poncho of Indian origin is a blanket with a center slit for the head. Made of vicuña wool, the poncho reaches down to the wearer's knees. When he is not wearing his poncho, the gaucho folds and ties it to his saddle. It serves as a blanket at night and as a shield when wrapped around a spare arm during a knife duel. To protect the horseman's legs against thorny thistles in northern Argentina, gauchos tie guardamontes, flared rawhide guards, to their saddles. During the War of Independence and the Battle of Tucumán of 1812, gaucho militias beat their guardamontes with their rebenque handles, resulting in ear-splitting assaults. The indigenous people didn't want to break horses like the Spanish did, using brute strength to stay atop a bucking horse. They developed an intuitive connection with the horse, gaining its trust before mounting it. The gaucho method is a mix of that native intuition and Spanish strength. A domador, horse tamer, teaches a horse to respond to a rider's cues, cut cattle, head off cows with its chest, and other tasks it will face. Boleadoras, lassos, and skills of the trapper and tracker were handed down to the gauchos by the Indians. Boleadoras are 2 or 3 balls of metal or stone wrapped in leather which dangle from braided leather cords. In hunting or battle, they can deliver a deadly blow. If flung with perfect aim, they can bring down a horse or cow by wrapping around their feet. At rodeos, gauchos demonstrate speed, strength, skill, and courage. In bronc riding, a gaucho mounts a wild horse. If the horse rears up and falls over onto its back, an experienced gaucho should land on his feet with the reins in his hand. In the sortilla, a gaucho on a galloping horse runs a lance through a tiny ring dangling from a crossbar. In another event, a contestant rides by gauchos who toss lassos at his horse's feet. If his horse falls, the contestant should land on his feet, again with the reins in his hand. In the maroma, a herd of wild horses are driven beneath a gaucho who drops from a corral gate onto a horse's back, bringing the horse under control, and returns to the gate. A gaucho follows his drove of horses, which he teaches to line up behind their lead mare. In tropilla competitions, a rider guides his string of horses without lead lines, asking them to stop, change direction, and remain close together, using voice commands and the sound of a bell tied to the lead mare's halter. Many competitions are held at festivals like the Fiesta Nacional de la Tradición in San Antonio de Areco, home of Ricardo Guerraldes, where gauchos have gathered each year since 1939 to celebrate gaucho culture. In the late 18th century, the central government in Buenos Aires issued large land grants to powerful men from the capital, In 1874, when barbed wire became available, landowners started fencing off open prairie lands for farming and livestock, limiting movement of cattle and gauchos on the Pampa. Wild horses and cattle became the property of landowners. Suddenly, nomadic gauchos were regarded as trespassers and cattle thieves. They were pressured to work for the ranchers, to round up, brand, and maintain herds, but at low wages. By 1876, ship refrigeration created a demand for beef exports, further enriching the ranchers. Gauchos fought valiantly to defend Argentina. Armed with crude lances and knives used in daily work, Gauchos fought against invading British forces in 1806 and 1807. On May 25, 1810, patriots of Buenos Aires expelled the last Spanish viceroy. In the Argentine War of Independence from 1810 to 1818, Gauchos fought bravely under Juan José Castelli and José de San Martin against Spanish troops to secure Argentine liberty. After the war, Argentines divided into Unitarians, elites who wanted a strong central government in Buenos Aires, and Federalist citizens who wanted a loose confederation of provinces. From 1820 to 1831, they opposed each other in a civil war. Gauchos made up the core of fighters for both armies. In the 1870s, Gauchos fought in the conquest of the desert, which extended Argentina into Patagonia, ending Chilean expansion there. Argentine troops displaced over 15,000 Mapuche Indians, killing more than 1,000, and enslaved some others. As the army pushed Indians out of their lands, justices of the peace were appointed to represent the state on the vast open plains. They were supposed to protect the rights of citizens, but often they did just the opposite. A vagrancy law allowed justices to draft unemployed gauchos to defend the southern frontier. A justice of the peace pushed the legendary gaucho, Martin Fierro, from his small estancia out to a military frontier fort. The rural police impounded his property, butchered his cattle, gave his horses away, abandoned his crops, and indentured his sons. Out of desperation, his wife left with the man who had arranged for his conscription. At the frontier, Fierro was mistreated by authorities. After 2 years of suffering, he deserted. When Fierro returned home, he discovered the demise of his homestead, livestock, and family. Through no fault of his own, everything he had loved was gone. Embittered, he became a gaucho outlaw. He despised cities, greedy landowners, and corrupt authorities. He gambled, raced, stole horses, killed the occasional cow, and dueled with knives. When the police tried to catch him, he headed for the desert. He loved the Pampa and the free life. Brave, generous, and long-suffering, he wasn't born to a lawless life, but was driven to it. Throughout the various regions of Argentina, gauchos perform many dances accompanied by singers, guitarists, and drummers. Among these are the gato, cielito, media caña, triunfo, pericon, huela, prado, and the malambo. A malambo dancer performs a sequence of lightning-fast zapateados, tapping or stomping, and cepillados, foot scraping, lunging, leg crossing, and kicking. With his head held high, he moves his body from the waist down, making his spurs tinkle. Sometimes the dancer twirls boleadoras or beats a drum. In his book, Folklore Bonaerense, Ventura Lynch describes malambo competitions that last all night. Spectators applaud, shout, and bet on the winner. At a pulperia, general store and tavern, gauchos watch two peadores, country troubadours, fight a duel of songs. One singer improvises rhyming lyrics, accompanied by his guitar. Then the other singer makes up his own rhyming verses, and they alternate back and forth. Gauchos perform tristes, mournful songs often about bygone wars, betrayal and misery, and vidalitas, popular songs with choruses. Like the outlaw gaucho Juan Morera, known for his 10-line décimas, gauchos often have an ear for melody and a love of verse improvisation. Gauchos drink mate, a stimulating Paraguayan tea, plain or sweetened, from a pear-shaped porongo, a dried mate gourd or wooden vessel, sometimes ornamented with silver. Sipping through a bombilla, metal straw, they drink it at any time of day. Originally, gauchos traded rhea feathers and skins and cow hides and tallow, fat used for soap and candles, for mate, sugar, gin, tobacco, and rum. Gauchos often wear red scarves around their necks, as their colonial ancestors did. Under an ombu tree, a strip of beef on an iron stake roasts above embers. A gaucho adjusts his horse's silver bridle, background center. 2 gauchos sip mate, left. 2 gauchos eat beef with their fasons, center and right. Next to silver spurs, 1 gaucho, lower right, squats with his fason tucked inside his tirador. Hanging from his fason is a rebenque with a silver handle, which the gaucho uses to speed up his horse. In a fight, the rebenque can damage a rival's face. A blow with the handle can knock down an opponent. Silver stirrups, a saddle, a bridle, a cinch, a saddle blanket and pad, boleadoras, a sheepskin pad, cinch padding, and a rebenque lie on the ground, lower left. Fashioned like an upside-down crown, the stirrups symbolize gaucho resistance to the Spanish king. Martin Fierro and other legendary free-riding gauchos of the open Pampa live on in Argentine art, literature, history, and music. The gaucho still exists across Argentina today. He's a gentlemanly countryman. Like his swashbuckling predecessors, he's a dexterous horseman, skilled with the lasso, boleadoras, and all livestock-related tasks. He loves music, dance, and verse. He teaches his skills and his traditions to his children. As long as there are cows, sheep, and horses to care for, this strong, brave son of the Pampa will roam the horizon at one with nature and his loyal steed. A gaucho he will always be.